Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
That's such a fine question. You think I'm okay? Get down, Jack. Want a dog?
I like Jack and all, but no.
No, I'm okay. I have a cocktail that you made for me.
Yeah, it's yummy. It's super simple. It's Evan Williams Black Label and some blood orange syrup.
Yeah, it's really good.
It's really good.
So here we are.
Here we are.
So what are we talking about today, my friend? What is sticking in your craw or tickling your fancy or whatever it is?
Well, I ran across a Pew study. Pew Research did a study that came out this month about why Americans go to church or don't go to church.
Which is a typical Pew thing. That's one of the Pew Institute's normal research areas, is the church-going habits of Americans. So this is not an unusual thing for them to do.
The study that they did, they surveyed Americans who go to church, so Americans who identify as Christians. They further broke that out into evangelicals, why evangelicals go to church, why Catholics go to church, and then why they don't go to church. So we'll talk about that too. And then they also broke it out by why men go to church, why men don't go to church, why women go to church, why millennials go to church, why African Americans go to church, and why Democrats go to church.
Okay, so these are all overlapping categories to begin with.
Of course.
So is it Roman Catholics, evangelicals, and all other Christian whatevers, or just Roman Catholics and evangelicals?
Well, they identify the religiously unaffiliated as a separate group. So essentially they're saying Americans, then they're saying evangelicals, Catholics, and religiously unaffiliated.
Isn't that an interesting division all by itself?
Yeah.
The assumptions in that?
Yeah.
Okay, we've talked before about how evangelical has become a synonym for Christian in this country. So often when people say Christian, they think evangelical.
Right.
I find it interesting that Pew is indulging in similar kinds of dividing. Americans, category. Evangelicals, Catholics, religiously unaffiliated, not including Orthodox,
Right.
not including other kinds of Protestant, because there are many other kinds of Protestant,
Many.
not including Christian Science, not including Unity, not including, none of those. Now, maybe they think those are all essentially religiously unaffiliated.
Maybe.
Or maybe they're trying to draw a particular parallel between two groups that we consider faithful in a particular way. You know what I mean? But I do find that interesting.
I do too. And I found interesting that the overwhelming reason for all the groups that I named off to go to church is to become closer to God.
Surveys generally ask questions. If it's a good survey, they try to make it as open to interpretation as possible. You gave some really interesting numbers. So what did Pew say the numbers were about evangelicals versus Catholics, Black Christians, millennials? What were they saying?
So Americans overall, why Americans go to church? The majority, 81%, said to become closer to God. 69% said so that children will have a moral foundation. 68% is to make me a better person. 66% for comfort in times of trouble and sorrow. 59% said they find the sermons valuable. 57%...
Clearly they don't go to churches that I've gone to. So,
Right.
anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
57% to be a part of a community of faith. And then some of the smaller percentages, 37% to continue a family's religious traditions, 31% feeling a religious obligation to go, 19% to meet new people and socialize, and 16% to please my family, spouse, or partner.
I love that. It was 81%, right?
81%.
Who say that the reason they go to church, and that's such interesting language all by itself, the reason they attend corporate worship is to draw closer, or to get closer to God.
To become closer
To
to God.
become closer to God. I wonder how many people who are non-affiliated would say that they desire to grow closer to God.
Well, let's just see.
Do they have that?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they're referred to as the nuns, N-O-N-E-S.
The homophone on that is just too funny.
Yeah, it is. It's really too funny. Okay, no, they don't have a why they do go to church. They have a why they don't go to church. What they're saying really is if you're religiously unaffiliated, then you identify as a Christian, but you don't attend church.
Right. But as somebody who's concerned about spiritual formation rather than church attendance,
Yes.
when people say that they want to get closer to God, I am interested in what they mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
For example, particularly if you're talking in terms of the evangelical world, you get closer to God in order to avoid eternal damnation.
Yes, right.
That's very different than wanting to grow closer to God.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm interested in what people thought they were saying when they said that.
Right.
You know how you have some areas of geekness? This is one of my areas of geekness. I love sitting down with the raw data on stuff like this. If you think about religiously non-affiliated or simply non-church attenders, I have trouble believing that they don't have a desire to grow close to the eternal, the
Right.
whatever the thing is. If they believe that there's something bigger than they are, even if it's just nature, not just, but even if it's nature, we want to be attached to it in some way. That's a very different thing than if I say, for example, I want to have a close relationship with God and I want to be in God's presence and enjoy God's company. And, that's a very different thing than I want to be close to what's big because it's big. You know what I mean? Or I want to be close to God and to avoid hell or whatever.
Yeah, I can't imagine somebody coming to you and saying, I want to become closer to God. And the thing that you say is, well, do you attend church?
Right.
What church do you attend? Let's start there. That is never, ever going to be the thing you start. It's probably not even on your list of 10 things of becoming closer to God.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? What else did you find interesting about this?
Well, here's some of the demographics of regular worshipers, okay? And regular worshipers, they identify as people that go to church at least once a month. 71% say they pray daily. 56% of them are women. 55
The ones who pray daily?
No, of all of them.
Okay.
All the regular worshipers.
Okay.
And probably the ones that pray daily, too.
I was praying for a good parking space this morning.
Ah.
I was not, however, praying to God. I was praying to, as you know, the parking goddess.
Right. Right.
The demigod, the parking goddess.
Right.
With whom I am in close relationship.
Yes.
And attend church for the purpose of sucking up to the parking goddess.
Yep.
When I'm at home, I really pray a lot to the parking goddess because parking sucks in San Francisco. Carry on.
So 71% pray daily, 56% of them are women, 55% of them are 50 or older.
That's not as heavy as I thought it was going to be.
Mm-mm.
That's interesting.
So just a little more than half. 31% are college graduates.
That makes sense.
And 45% identify as Democrats or lean that way.
See, that's interesting too.
That's the number that surprised me.
The 45% who are Democrats or lean that way, which sounds a little bit like they're going to come out of the closet, doesn't it? I kind of lean towards a little Democratic. Right. I don't tell my family.
No.
Anyway.
So they talk to Catholics and they talk to evangelicals. If 45% of the total identify as Democrats, does that mean the 45% all came from the Catholic side?
Funny that we both thought the same thing.
Because what card-carrying evangelical is going to identify as Democrat?
Well, there are a couple.
A couple?
Okay, wait, hold on. Trying to think of one. I mean, and that's where the language starts to get really messed up.
Right.
So, what we should do is look up what it was like 10 years ago for evangelicals. This survey was done, the end of last year?
End of last year, December 2017.
In my conversation with Doug Padgett a couple of episodes ago, and by the way, folks, if you didn't listen to the interview with Doug Padgett, who is the pastor of Solomon's Porch in the Minneapolis area and is the very vocal, forward person on Vote Common Good, he and I were talking about people who have traditionally voted Republican out of habit or out of conviction.
Yeah.
But over the last couple of years, because of the way that the Republican Party has been going and because of the current president, don't feel comfortable voting Republican anymore. So it'd be interesting to see whether that 45% of churchgoers, whether it was 45% lean Democratic or are Democrats 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That would be an interesting
That
number.
would be interesting to know. And then they did poll Democrats. If you said that you were a Democrat, they gathered that data together.
And then said, do you know you're going to hell?
And basically, right, given that you're going to hell, do you believe Satan is real? Yes or no? Do you believe God is real? Yes or no?
Because if you believe those are real, then you're voting wrong.
Right.
All right, sorry, carry on.
Right. Of the Democrats, 77% said their important reason for attending was to become closer to God.
Well, see, yeah.
But here's an interesting thing, too.
Okay.
52% of them said it was to be a part of a community of faith, which was a greater number than it was with the evangelicals.
That makes sense.
You think so?
I think that absolutely makes sense. Here's why I think it makes sense. Mainline church has really been mostly focused on the Sunday morning, where evangelicals, because they're trying to create a particular culture, Sunday morning is really important, but summer camp is important.
Yeah.
The baseball team is important, all that kind of stuff, because you're trying to create a community, a
Right.
particular community.
Right.
In mainline churches, very often, Sunday morning is the thing, and then you might do something else. So Sunday morning would be when you would come to community.
Ah, right.
What I'm hearing is that Democrats are really comfortable all staring in the same direction, singing the same songs, and feel like they've made community.
I guess.
Kumbaya. Now, what did it say for African Americans as opposed to white Catholics, whatever?
Well, 89% of African Americans say they go to church to become closer to God. That's a huge number. 84% to become a better person. 79% for comfort. 74% because the sermons are valuable. 77% so that their children grow up with a moral foundation. And 64% to be a part of a community.
That's interesting. That would track really well with the role of the church in black communities historically.
Right. Yeah. And then when you look at reasons why people don't go to church, also interesting.
Okay, before you read this,
Yeah.
what would you have said was the main reason people don't go to church? If you were just guessing.
Hypocrisy.
Say more.
I think that people who don't go to church, who either would avow or disavow wanting to be a follower of Christ or wanting to believe in a bigger, higher power. So it doesn't really matter. Identify as believer or not. I think they don't want to be a part of a group of people that's disingenuous.
Oh, not their hypocrisy, the hypocrisy of the church.
Yeah, the hypocrisy of the church.
Got it. Okay.
The answer, why Americans don't go to church, 37% said it's because they practice their faith in other ways. 28%, I'm not a believer.
Well, that would make sense.
Yeah. 26%, there's not a reason that is quote unquote very important. I guess in the poll, they were identifying these reasons as very important. What are the very important reasons?
So wait, can you be both not a believer and no particular reason? Because otherwise, that adds up to what, 54%?
Yeah.
26 and 28, 54%?
Yeah, it says I am not a believer, but that is like the nuns. That's the group that's religiously unaffiliated.
That's N-O-N-E-S again, not N-U-N-S,
Right.
which would be confusing.
Weird. So anyway, but other reasons why Americans don't go to church. 23% they've not found a church that they like. 18% they don't like the sermons. 14% they don't feel welcome. 12% they don't have the time. 9% it's difficult to get around. And 7% there isn't a church for my religion in my area.
Other than it's difficult to get around, I don't buy any of it. I
Yeah.
really don't. Because, all right, as a former senior pastor, I can say that one of the things that pastors lament is consumerism in church culture, in the American culture. So it doesn't have the right air conditioning. They don't have the right music. They don't wear the right clothes. You know what I mean? Whatever it is. The idea that you're going to watch a show and either the show affects you or it doesn't affect you. That's what people complain about. As pastors, you complain about that. I mean, you know this as a worship leader, right?
Sure.
Somehow you're supposed to be both technically perfect, as if you were Hillsong in the recording studio, right? And yet, flawed, vulnerable. Right? Really acknowledging the movement of the Spirit. Like, if you're actually acknowledging the movement of the Holy Spirit, there will be times when you will simply ignore whether you're technically perfect or not.
Oh, all the time,
Well,
right?
yes, but you're not supposed to do that. I mean, I think you know that.
Yeah.
You've been told that, right?
Well.
If you haven't, I'm telling you now.
Okay, thanks.
So
I'm glad to
stop
know
that.
this.
Stop that. But there is that, and this started with the boomers, so I blame the boomers. But that sense of, this isn't a community that is doing worship together. This is an audience and a stage presence.
Right.
That piece.
Yeah.
And then also the consumerism of, well, the ones down the street have coffee that comes from, wherever, and the others don't. And I think that that's true to a degree, but I don't think it's as true as pastors like to think it is. So that sense that I haven't found a church I like, I think that part of that is the cultural thing of we have to like church.
Yeah.
And here's the reason this bothers me. I'm going to get letters, right? If you're not thinking about church as the worship service, but you're thinking about it as the gathering of the body of Christ, there's going to be a lot you don't like because people getting together just aren't fun.
Right.
I mean, I never like it when people get together.
People really shouldn't get together.
Darn it! That's where we went wrong. No, but I mean, if you get more than one person in a room, you're going to have conflict.
Right.
That's the nature of creatures.
Right.
So to say I don't like the church, or I haven't found a church I like, that's where that whole worship is supposed to be presentational, and you as a worship leader are supposed to be, I don't know, whoever you're supposed to be, but you're supposed to have this particular presentational aspect.
Sure.
That's where that stuff really becomes problematic. I mean, where the church, not the eternal church, but where the local church works is when it becomes a place where you can totally F it up, you'll be forgiven, and you can try again. It becomes a close community of a whole bunch of people messing it up all the time.
Right.
And then being challenged if they mess it up in a really big way. But otherwise kind of being just admonished and saying, that's not going to work in a community. That's not how communities work.
Right.
That's where churches, that's when they work really, really well as bodies of people aiming to be closer to God, to be better people, to raise their children with morality, whatever those things are. It's that. If you look for a community where you like everybody, it's going to be a community of one.
Right.
Maybe half. Because I don't like myself part of the time.
Well, yeah, I hear you. I think that cuts to another common criticism, not mentioned in this survey, but that churches function as social clubs or are very exclusive. So being a part of a community for some evangelicals or even some Catholics maybe would be to be in a church full of people that look like you, spend like you,
sing like you,
have kids that look like your kids,
vote like you,
for sure.
So if you come from the white liberal church, you are expected to find a way to attract and keep people of radically different musical tastes and backgrounds and so forth. If you come from the black church, you're not expected to do that. Now, there's good reason for that.
Sure.
If you go back to the first century, it's gatherings of people in exile.
Yeah.
Of course it's going to be people you feel comfortable with.
Uh-huh.
And I think that when we went out into the prairie and whatever and started churches or into the suburbs, which is like the prairie, and did that, it's still that.
Yeah.
Of all of the things in this that are cited, what's the one that struck you as being really surprising?
I don't think it's true that most Americans go to church to become closer to God. I just don't.
So let's just stay there for a minute.
I've lived in the Bible Belt my entire life. I've been a church-going Christian for 40 years. I think people go to church out of guilt to avoid hell. I think they go to church because their friends are there. I think they go to church because it makes them feel charitable when they give, makes them feel generous. I'll even say it makes some Christians feel better about themselves because they go and they serve and they give things. Right, and it's ego. And I don't mean that everybody goes for nefarious reasons, but if we're really being honest, people go out of guilt. Their motivations are because they've been told that if they don't go to church on Sunday, if they don't tithe, if they don't do this list of things and do it well, then they're going to hell. Now, people form friendships there, of course. People like the social aspects of it. They like the potlucks, and they like the picnics, and they like that their kids have a place to hang out with other kids. Youth group for me was great. And I think a lot of kids have that, or if they don't have that, their parents want them to, so they drag them to church. And that's a part of it. And that was one of the statistics on here that I really believed. People want to give their children some sort of a moral thing. But I think also underneath that, they want to give their children a social group or a peer group that they don't feel completely terrified by.
Yeah, that's right.
And when they want to sleep over, they're not afraid that they're going to get into trouble. Even though we all know the deacon's kids are the worst ones.
You're warning me about my child, aren't you? Where the people you doubt are actually going there to become closer to God, whatever that means. What they would have to believe is that the more often and this is not a numbers thing, it's an experiential thing, the more often I attend Sunday worship, the closer I will be to God. And so I may not think I get brownie points. Do brownies have points anymore? I may not think I get my kid didn't. I don't think I get brownie points for attending, but the more often I walk into the church building, hang out with other people for an hour, hour and a half, and then leave, the closer I will be to God because I have done that. Mm-hmm. That's what that means, right?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. See, I think that's sincere. I think it's deeply misguided. Mm-hmm. But I think it's sincere. Please, please, folks, if you're listening to this, I would love to hear from you about if you go to worship, why you go on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
And if you're a pastor, frankly, why you bother. Not that you shouldn't, but just why. This used to really get me when I was a senior pastor. I think we've given people the illusion that showing up on Sunday mornings is what it takes to become close to the God of all things for all time.
Oh, people have heard that.
But that's not...
They hear it from the pulpit. They get guilted into it from the pulpit.
Right, but think about the difference between getting guilted into coming from the pulpit, which is also connected with tithes, which is also connected with how many butts are in the seats, and am I going to get credit for that? But just the walking through the church doors Sunday morning and staying there for a particular length of time is what draws you closer to God. I'm thinking now about people I am acquainted with, but I do not know well. Mm-hmm. So you are a terrible example for this. But I would not think that if I walked into a department store where one of those people also was, that I would draw closer to them simply by being in the department store with them.
Right. Even though you might bond over a pair of jeans.
At some point. Sure.
I love these jeans too.
We haven't been shopping much together, really.
We don't shop.
Not much. But think about it for a minute. I mean, that's what these questions are about. Almost all of them. Yeah. If you walk into a building for an hour to an hour and a half on a particular day of the week, do you feel closer to somebody else who happens to be on the other side of the room from you? Whether it's God or another human being. That's what these questions are about.
Yeah.
If you are in the same room with God and Fred every Sunday, do you feel closer to them? Which is nonsense.
I think you're right.
That's what they mean by this.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
The problem is that we have such a low bar of what it means to be close to people or to God. That's what's going on. It's the low bar.
Yeah, it's a very low bar.
But it is.
And what that really says is that people don't really understand what it is to be close to God.
Or to people.
Or to people.
And that's why, frankly, when people come to a church community and they attend for a while and they don't actually bond with anybody closely in that spiritual way, not just the, affection way, but the spiritual way, why they eventually just kind of fall off and leave. Mm-hmm. It's because what they wanted was the spiritual way. But if everybody's there just because by being in the same room with people you draw close to them, why would you bond spiritually? Why would you do that? It doesn't.
Well, and you're not doing anything there that's required to bond spiritually. You're sitting,
Listening.
facing the same person, experiencing the same music and the same sermon. Then you might shake hands and go. I mean, you're going to get to know Fred a lot better at the bar than you will at church.
By far. That's what this is talking about. The Pew study is not talking about church or faith or God at all. It's talking about the way that Americans think they connect and socialize. This is the social media version of church.
Yeah.
If I check in on Facebook once a week and see what everybody's doing, I will be closer to them.
What do you think this means for the state of the American church?
Oh, I think it's dead.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know that.
Mm-hmm.
There is a paper that will come out about this that's written that I just, I'm lazy. I think there are many actual churches in what I would call churches, but most are not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the only real church is the eternal church.
Right.
I don't think people make the church. I think God makes the church. The Eucharist makes the church. The church exists and people show up or they don't. I don't think that people getting together for a softball game in the name of Jesus makes church.
Right. Right.
How about you? You kind of float between a few worlds on this particular thing.
Well, I do, because church is something that I experience separately and apart from my relationship with God. Church was where I learned how to play the piano. Church is where I learned how to play for a congregation to sing. Church is where I learned how to sing. Church is where my songwriting began. Church is where I had my first girlfriend. I mean, I experienced a lot of important formative things within the context of church. So church is something different and kind of uniquely special for me. Mm-hmm. That has really nothing at all to do with my relationship with God.
Wait. I'm sorry. Nothing? Can you finesse that a little bit?
I do experience God when I'm at church, quotes, when I am with other Christians, communally worshiping, corporately worshiping, listening to a sermon, all of that experience of church. But I think church, as I experienced it as a kid, I was a kid that knew God before I started going to church.
I think most kids do.
I was a kid that was pretty attuned to God, felt loved and accepted by God before we started attending church. I was baptized in the church as a baby, and then we stopped going. I know, it's true. I was christened as a baby in a Nazarene church.
My life has just been blown to smithereens.
I know, I was. I barely remember the church that I was baptized in, and then there was a span of time that we didn't go. During that time, I always felt close to God. So church wasn't so much a part of that. For me, once we started attending church, a lot of milestones that I experienced as a kid happened for me in church. And those things to me have a lot less to do with my relationship with God. I felt like God was there and God was a part of all that. But it had to do with my formation as a human. It had to do with me becoming a whole person as a kid.
I think your experience of church as a kid is what church is supposed to be about. It's the place where you can mess up, try things on, get forgiven, get brought back into it's that. That's what the people part of church is supposed to be. I wonder if what we're really seeing in surveys like this is the difference between why adults who don't already have a sense of God go to Sunday worship versus why adults who already have a sense of God go or don't go.
Yeah.
If I were the kind of person who didn't have that sense of God that you had growing up or that I have now, and I wanted to find it, I'd go into the woods, I'd go to church. Those are really my options.
Yeah.
If I already have it, then I might go to church to get the other stuff. And if I found a group of people who were trying to go really deep in their relationship with God or get real or breakthrough, whatever the kind of stuff that we do as School for Seekers, I would find that in churchy groups, that is, people who have a connection with church and have a connection with God and are trying to sort all that out.
Right.
But church, in the way it's normally structured, wouldn't work. I think what this survey says has much less to do with Americans and people than has to do with how we've lost track of what it means to create community. We don't know how to do any of this.
Yeah.
We go to churches to find that and then are disappointed or dismayed when they can't do that because, of course, they don't know any better either. And either we keep going for one of those other reasons underneath the 77% or whatever it was, or we stop. I mean, your experience as a kid of church is what it's supposed to be for new believers. At the risk of really radical self-promotion, I wrote this little paper that's available to everybody about the spiritual journey, about the 6 steps.
Yes.
It's about that.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about.
Yeah.
That as part of the spiritual journey, as part of maturing, we go through this suddenly discovering God and being excited about God and close to God the way you were as a little kid. And then the learning the authorities who are useful to us, and the pastors and the gurus and the parents and the whatever, who actually are great for us. And then we have to push against them. And then we bond with the community. And then eventually you have to push against the community. This is normal human development.
Yeah.
And then most churches end right there.
Yeah.
And that's what people are talking about. They're talking about the fact that when they find a community that doesn't actually challenge them and say, hey, where do you see God in that? Not, oh, look, I see God working here. But where do you experience God in that? They go find God at the bar. And there's not a darn thing wrong with that.
Of course not.
But they're not going to go to church to do it.
I think you're right about that. I really do.
I wrote a poem many years ago that my husband likes to remind me of, that I don't think I even have a copy of anymore, but he may have. It was, where do you go when the churches are closed? It was about that, how do you find community? How do you find God? Because churches are open 2 hours a week. What does that mean?
I'd love to read that.
Yeah, well, you'll have to ask him. I don't have it.
So what do you guys think about that? Why do you go to church? Or why don't you go to church?
Or why would we even be asking?
Why is this question important?
And is it?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a different question. When do you feel closest to God? And when do you feel closest to God with other people?
That's a great question. So give us some feedback there. CocktailTheology.com or on our Facebook page, wherever you find us, School for Seekers.
Email, anything.
Give us some feedback on that. We would really love to know that.
We really want to know that. Because, what we do in the rest of our lives in School for Seekers is try to help people find a depth with God and with other people. We work really hard to help you rethink and refeel your way and learn practices, including being vulnerable and getting beat up by, not literally, but beat up by other people, and then learning to deal with that and finding God through that and all of that. But that sense of, this is a life.
Yes.
What we take on when we decide to be part of God's community is a life. It changes everything.
It does.
Because we look through a different lens. And what we try to do as School for Seekers, what we try to do even in Cocktail Theology when we're doing this, is try to help people rethink their entire paradigm, their entire way of being, not so that they become holy, 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 and they're getting tithing and all of that, but that they can turn and suddenly God goes, hey, and then they go, yes.
And they know it's God when it
happens.
happens.
And they know it's God.
Right.
So we would love to hear from you about where you have those moments of yes, or where you have the moments of there's no God here, or when at those moments in a community you have said, oh, wow, God's really here right now. And you didn't know how to describe it because it wasn't something you could point to, but you knew it.
Yeah.
And if you've never felt that way, why? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, we would love to know that. Also, one of the things that we're doing as School for Seekers, we're doing a one-day retreat, October 20th, that is basically about what are our ideas around God, about ourselves and God in relation to one another. some of the things that we would swear we don't believe, but when you're taking it apart, we really kind of do. Mm-hmm. It's a really, really transformative study that we do, and would love for you to be a part of it. October 20th, please consider coming to Nashville and hanging out with us for the day.
And you get to spend 13 hours with us.
That's right, 13 hours.
13 hours. Because, we only get rolling after a couple.
That's true.
So if you're interested in registering for Discover the Really Real God,
yes.
you can go to reallyrealgod.com and register for that. We would love to have you. If you have any questions about it, please email us at info@schoolforseekers.com. Go onto our page. Message us directly. We are really responsive.
Hey, we want to hear from you. Do you get that? Yeah. We really, really want to hear from you.
You know what? And in fact, if you're in the Nashville area and want to be here when we are doing this conversation, we would love to have that. We've done that before. So please contact us. We would love to do that. We'd love to come to you. Basically, we love what we do and we love you. And we love God. And any combination of that is okay with us.
Yep. And Jack can attest to the fact, because he sits with us many, many times when we're recording. You've heard him.
And he's getting restless, and so that means
wants us to open the door, and
we're
it's
kind of done.
Yep. But anyway, that's us. That's what we do, and we love that you guys are listening and paying attention. So
thank you.
Please tell your friends. Please subscribe.
Tell your friends.
Please give us reviews. All those things help a great deal to grow what we do. And also, you can find us on patreon.com, where you can help us in other more tangible ways, and we will appreciate you in tangible ways as well.
That's right. I will give you a big hug if you
Yeah,
come here.
hugs. All right, guys.
Thank you for joining us.
Yes, we appreciate you.
Very, very much.
Bye.
Bye.